Hello everyone, this is Trace. Today let's look at human rights. The red flag that the US so famously waves to attack other countries, accusing them of violations. It is doing exactly that on its own soil. It's double standard, and the US has mastered it to attack human rights worldwide. This is not an empty accusation. Historical facts prove it. According to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN document that sets out the rights and freedoms of all human beings, everyone is born free and equal in dignity and rights, regardless of nationality, place of residence, gender, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, language, or any other status. The principle is expected to be followed by all UN member countries, including the US. In fact, human rights diplomacy is supposed to be at the core of American foreign strategy. In 1976, then US President Jimmy Carter said that the US would rekindle the beacon of human rights, which was not a declaration to polish up the US image or the discredit policies of the past.
The government of the United States will continue throughout the world to enhance human rights.
It was part of a broad effort to use our great power and our tremendous influence in the service of creating a better world, a world in which human beings can live in peace, in freedom, and with their basic needs adequately met. However, since the Cold War, the US has taken human rights as a weapon to expand its influence and interfere in other countries' internal affairs. Kyrgyzstan is a prime example. After Kyrgyzstan became independent in 1991, it welcomed American NGOs, and the two countries enjoyed a period of honeymoon. But in 2001, when the Bush administration built the Manas Air Base near the capital of Kyrgyzstan to support US military operations in Afghanistan, American soldiers at the base often had disputes with the locals. Then Kyrgyz President Askar Akayev expressed concerns, which angered Washington. American NGOs started to accuse Akayev of human rights violation. Eventually, there was a so-called Tulip Revolution that overthrew Akayev. It is widely acknowledged to be the result of the US intervention. It is reported Washington funneled its support for the opposition parties in Kyrgyzstan through American NGOs. Another prime example is the war on Iraq. In 2003, the Bush administration accused Iraqi President Saddam Hussein of possessing weapons of mass destruction.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
Then, U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell even presented a test tube with some powdery substance at the UN Security Council, alleging it contained biochemical weapons that could cause great damage. It was never disclosed what the test tube actually contained. When the US military invaded Iraq, they couldn't find any WMD, so they changed the narrative and said that the attack was to protect the human rights of the people of Iraq. The war in Afghanistan was started in the name of countering terrorism. One of the targets is Taliban. However, the Taliban is said to be originally supported by the US to counter the USSR when the latter invaded Afghanistan. And now that US troops are finally withdrawing from Afghanistan, they are leaving behind a war-torn country suffering massive humanitarian disasters, and a stronger and anti-US Taliban. Closer home in China, we have a very similar story. Donald Trump started a trade war with China, banned Chinese companies, prevented Chinese students and scholars from getting a US visa, and sanctioned Chinese officials. He violated the basic principles of free trade the US had agreed to follow as a member of the World Trade Organization. The US lost the moral high ground internationally. So then, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his State Department started a propaganda war, creating fake news about so-called human rights violation in Xinjiang. Forced labor, genocide, concentration camps, such fake headlines began to mushroom overnight. But in fact, US never stopped destabilizing China by fomenting unrest with the Uyghurs of Xinjiang. Clearly, this is how they gain leverage at the negotiating table, by using human rights as a bargaining chip. If America cares so much about human rights, how come it treats its own people without any consideration for their human rights? Have you heard about the Tulsa race massacre? One of the worst racial massacres in the US history. For decades, what happened there was woefully buried in history. In 1921, the thriving African American community in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was nearly destroyed in a series of attacks by white mobs. They even used aerial bombing, killing hundreds of residents and erasing years of black success. U.S. Department of Labor statistics indicate that the U.S. has about 500,000 child agricultural workers, which is a violation of the child rights. The U.S. is the only country that has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Appearing on Global Arena, a CGTN debate on human rights, former Singaporean ambassador to the UN, Kishore Mahbubani said, "What matters is not only where a person is born, but how low one is the social ladder."
When you talk of freedom, if you are born in the bottom 10%, even in a wealthy country like the United States, and especially if you are black, your chances of going to jail and spending decades in jail can be almost 50%.
Last year, in the United States, more than 600,000 people died in the pandemic. More than 40,000 people died in the shootings. And there were more than 500,000 homeless people. Were their human rights protected? Like I said at the beginning, human rights should not be a red flag or a political tool. In the US, the wealth gap is widening. Society is getting polarized, and the pandemic is exacerbating inequality. The US should give up using human rights as a weapon and instead focus on giving Americans a better life. All right, that's all for today, and see you again soon.